For thousands of years, before the invention of paper or plumbing, before kings and queens sat on gilded thrones, and before even the earliest writings carved into stone, human beings faced a universal reality, one that every creature shares, but few ever dare to examine with honesty or empathy: the act of cleaning oneself after defecation. It is not glamorous, it is not heroic, but it is deeply human. It's easy to take for granted the small conveniences of modern life: soft toilet paper, private stalls, flowing water, sanitation. But in the vast timeline of human history, these luxuries are recent, almost absurdly so. For the majority of our existence, tens of thousands of years, humans had to innovate with nothing more than what the earth provided: leaves, sticks, snow, rocks, water, sand. Their environment was their toolbox and their bathroom. This is not the story of tools or technique. It is the story of a primal necessity hidden in plain sight. It is about survival, shame, adaptation, and the forgotten ingenuity of early humans. It's a story not told in school books or documentaries, but it shaped who we were and who we became. To understand what it was like wiping in prehistoric times, we must first go back, far back, before history had a name. Imagine waking up in a Paleolithic morning. Your shelter is a cave or a crude hut made of bones and brush. You rise to a damp breeze, the air thick with the scent of ash, wet earth, and the musk of your tribe. Life is hard. Every action, every movement is tied to survival: eat, hunt, warmth, safety. But there are also the private moments, the moments you don't talk about around the fire, moments of relief and discomfort, because even in the Ice Age, your bowels don't care about the cold. And once nature has run its course, what then? Unlike modern man, prehistoric humans lacked a concept of privacy, yet they instinctively sought some distance from the center of the group when relieving themselves. Archaeological evidence shows that even early campsites had designated waste areas, places farther from the hearth, hidden behind trees or near streams. These sites, seemingly simple, were acts of practical genius. Defecating too close to one's dwelling invited predators, disease, and the scorn of one's kin. Sanitation, though primitive, was a necessity born of experience. But the moment after defecation, the uncomfortable, itchy, grimy aftermath, demanded action. The early human had a choice to make: do nothing or adapt. Some did nothing. In warmer climates, with looser clothing or no clothing at all, walking away from the mess was common. In these cases, nature itself was relied upon: sunlight, dry air, and time. But this wasn't always enough, and it wasn't always acceptable. In colder regions, doing nothing was a problem. Feces could freeze to the skin. It could cause rashes, infections, or sores. And so the people of the north became innovators by necessity. They turned to what was available: the frozen snow, smooth river stones, or whatever soft vegetation they could find. A fistful of snow might sting, but it left no residue. In fact, among Arctic peoples, snow remained a preferred method well into recorded history. In more temperate zones, leaves were the obvious solution. Broad, soft, and plentiful, but not all leaves are safe. Some are irritating, some are toxic. Early humans learned this the hard way. Trial and error left marks: burns, swelling, hives. But knowledge was passed on, through gestures, mimicry, and later, language. What to use and what to avoid became ancestral wisdom. We often think of tools as spears, knives, or fire-hardened sticks, but sanitation tools were just as critical, even if they left no trace in the fossil record. Unlike stone tools, biodegradable wiping materials rarely survive the passage of time, but hints remain: in the residue found near latrine pits, in pollen trapped in coprolites, and in ancient soils rich with plant matter. In parts of Africa, early humans may have used bundles of grass, tied together, twisted slightly, moistened by water or saliva, used carefully, discarded discreetly. Grass was gentle, flexible. It worked. In areas with abundant water, rinsing was also possible. Streams and rivers weren't just for drinking, they were for cleaning. The act of crouching near the water and washing oneself is still practiced today in parts of the world where traditional customs persist. It's ancient, and it worked. Rocks, too, became tools. Flat, smooth stones warmed in the sun, cold and harsh in the morning, but tolerable by midday. Used gently, they could scrape, lift, and remove. It's an image that defies modern comfort, but to them, it was normal. Necessary. The Inuit used moss. Clean, dry moss gathered in bundles was soft enough for even the most sensitive skin. The Ainu of Japan, similarly, used sticks wrapped in cloth or soft fibers. In Southeast Asia, banana leaves provided a broad, waxy, and disposable surface. Nature offered options. Humans, ever observant, turned the world into their toolkit. Even sticks played their part, used carefully, perhaps with soft bark or wrapped with fiber. There is even evidence in ancient Japanese cultures of chugi, thin sticks used to clean oneself, not unlike early versions of the Roman tersorium. But we must resist the urge to laugh. These were not primitive people fumbling in the dark. They were survivors. Every method, every choice was honed by necessity, shaped by environment, and passed down through trial. Today, we treat sanitation as a private, almost sacred act. Locked doors, flushing sounds to mask the noise, an arsenal of scented products to erase any trace. But in prehistoric times, was there shame? Probably not in the way we understand it. Shame is a cultural construct, one that evolves with social complexity. In small nomadic bands, survival outweighed modesty. Children watched adults. Adults mimicked elders. There was no secrecy, no potty training in the modern sense. But that didn't mean they were crude or unfeeling. Prehistoric people were acutely aware of filth, rot, and contamination. They knew the difference between clean and unclean, the difference between water that was safe to drink and water that stank of waste. The evidence is clear in how they organized their camps, how they buried feces, how they returned to certain places and avoided others. There was understanding, perhaps even taboo. And in this awareness, the seeds of shame may have been planted, not because defecation was wrong, but because it threatened the group. A poorly placed pile of waste could bring disease. A careless act could anger spirits or pollute sacred ground. In some tribal traditions, even today, feces are associated with bad luck, with impurity, with danger. These are not modern ideas, they are ancient echoes. The act of wiping, then, was not just about comfort, it was about responsibility, to oneself, to the group, to the unseen forces that governed their world. There are no cave paintings of this act, no ancient carvings detailing the morning rituals of hygiene, and yet we know it happened, because it had to. From the sands of Africa to the icy tundra of Siberia, every tribe, every group, every early human faced this reality, and every one of them found a way. Their methods were invisible, biodegradable, humble, but they were effective, and they were shared. A child would learn by watching. A mother might hand a leaf to her son. A father might gesture toward the stream. There were no instructions, no manuals, just the wordless knowledge passed from generation to generation, the quiet education of being human. And through this we glimpse something profound. Even in the most mundane aspects of life, especially in them, there is tradition, memory, dignity. As early humans transitioned from nomadic life to settled communities, everything changed. How they ate, how they slept, how they worshipped, and yes, how they dealt with the most basic human need, sanitation. It was no longer just about personal cleanliness or avoiding wild animals in the forest. In villages, towns, and eventually cities, the stakes were higher. One person's waste was now everyone's problem. This was the dawn of a new era in human hygiene, an era where wiping the body became tied to something much bigger, the survival of society itself. Long before the Romans built their aqueducts and before Greek philosophers debated virtue, the people of the Indus Valley were quietly, astonishingly, flushing. It was nearly 5,000 years ago when the city of Mohenjo-Daro, nestled in what is now modern-day Pakistan, engineered something extraordinary, a drainage system. Clay pipes, brick-lined drains, and private latrines inside homes. Waste would be carried away with water, flowing into covered channels that snaked beneath the city streets. This wasn't just innovation, it was revolution, because for the first time in human history, people weren't wiping in the woods or beside the river. They were wiping at home. The exact methods of cleansing remain speculative, but clues abound. Soft rags, clay shards, water vessels. In a civilization so clearly devoted to cleanliness, it's likely that wiping materials were not only available, but routinely used. The same held true in ancient Mesopotamia. In Sumer, the earliest known civilization, people lived in close quarters. Clay tablets describe rituals of purification, and archaeological finds suggest the use of sponges or pieces of ceramic to clean oneself after defecating. Sometimes these shards, known as ostraca, were even repurposed pieces of writing, scraped clean of ink, and reused for the most humbling purpose imaginable. But the star of the ancient sanitation world was, without question, Rome. When we think of Roman civilization, we picture towering columns, marble statues, and the roar of the Colosseum. But beneath the grandeur was a practical, often uncomfortable reality: public toilets. Romans called them latrinae, and they were communal. Rows of stone seats side by side, often with no dividers. Beneath each seat ran a stream of water to carry waste away. But what truly set Roman hygiene apart was the tersorium, a sponge attached to a stick. After relieving oneself, a Roman citizen would rinse the tersorium in a gutter of running water and use it to clean themselves. Then it would be placed back in a shared trough, soaked in salt water or vinegar, and left for the next person. By today's standards, it's stomach-churning, but to them it was logical, efficient, civilized. And yet, this practice also revealed something deeper about Roman society. There was no shame in defecation, at least not in the way we experience it now. Public toilets were social spaces. Men sat side by side, talking politics, gossiping, exchanging news, and wiping. Cleanliness in Rome was not private, it was public, collective, essential to urban life. In many ancient cultures, wiping was not just a matter of health, it was tied to spirituality. In ancient Egypt, cleanliness was divine. The Nile provided water not only for drinking and irrigation, but also for ritual bathing. Priests would bathe several times a day. Personal hygiene was a spiritual obligation. Though direct evidence of their wiping materials is scarce, scholars believe they used water, linen cloths, or perhaps soft papyrus. For a society obsessed with purity and the afterlife, even the body's waste had to be handled with reverence. In Hindu culture, which emerged thousands of years ago and still endures, sanitation and ritual purity were intimately linked. The left hand was designated for cleaning after defecation, never used for eating or greeting others. This custom survives today in parts of India and Southeast Asia. Wiping was never just physical, it was moral, spiritual, a way to remain clean in the eyes of the divine. But as cities grew, so did the problems. In ancient China, dynasties built vast urban centers. People lived shoulder to shoulder. Waste was collected in pots and thrown into open streets or dumped into rivers. Wiping materials ranged from bamboo sticks to water dippers to cloth. But the real problem wasn't what people used, it was where the waste went. Disease followed: typhoid, dysentery, cholera. The same happened in medieval Europe. Castles might have had latrines built into stone walls, chutes that emptied into moats, but most commoners relieved themselves in outhouses or alleyways. Wiping? If you were lucky, moss or hay. More often, scraps of cloth, or even nothing at all. The fall of Rome brought with it the collapse of public sanitation systems, and for centuries, hygiene regressed. The sponge on a stick disappeared. Bathing became rare. Cleanliness was suspect. And with that, wiping became crude once again. As civilizations developed separately, so too did their attitudes toward wiping. In Islamic societies, cleanliness remained paramount. The Quran instructed believers to wash with water, istinja, after using the bathroom. Even today, bidets and handheld water sprays are common across the Muslim world. Wiping with dry materials alone was seen as incomplete. Water was purification. In contrast, medieval Europeans, without access to regular water supplies, relied on dry methods, rags, straw, even corn cobs in rural areas. And as paper became more common, some turned to discarded manuscripts, catalogues, and newspapers. The Chinese, inventors of paper, may have been the first to use it for personal hygiene. In records from the Tang dynasty, it was noted that officials would not use paper bearing sacred texts to wipe themselves. This implies that paper, ordinary paper, was being used for that very purpose. As societies branched apart, so too did their methods. Some used water, others used wood, still others used paper. But the goal remained unchanged: to clean, to protect, to preserve health, and in some cases, to uphold spiritual dignity. We cannot speak about ancient hygiene without acknowledging a cruel truth. Class mattered. If you were wealthy in ancient Rome, you might have your own private toilet, your own sponge, your own servant to fetch fresh water. If you were a noble in medieval England, you might have soft cloths, perfumed linen, and attendants who discreetly disposed of the waste. But if you were poor, if you were a laborer, a servant, a peasant, the story was different. You wiped with whatever you could find: grass, hay, sticks, stone, your hands rinsed in a nearby ditch. And you did it quickly, quietly, always near the edge of judgment. This divide persisted across cultures. The poor made do with the rough edges of the world. The rich softened theirs. And through this lens, wiping becomes more than hygiene. It becomes a window into inequality, into the daily indignities of life for those history often forgets. Humanity had come far since its Paleolithic beginnings. From snow and moss to aqueducts and sacred rituals, the act of cleaning after defecation had grown more complex, more symbolic, more tied to class and culture. And yet, for all the sophistication and structure of ancient civilization, there was still no universal solution, just endless variations on a common need. For thousands of years, wiping was an act shaped by necessity, culture, and improvisation. But with the rise of industrial civilization, a new chapter began, one that would redefine hygiene, privacy, and even shame itself. This was the age of invention, the age when wiping left behind the wild, the stone and the sponge, and became paper. It started quietly. In 6th century China, long after inventing paper itself, scholars noted that sheets were being used to clean after defecation. By the 14th century and the Yuan dynasty, records show that more than 700,000 sheets of paper were being produced annually in one province for this very purpose. These were coarse, perfumed sheets, softened, sometimes scented, reserved for the imperial court. But it would be centuries before the rest of the world caught up. In Europe, even as printing presses churned out books and pamphlets, toilet habits remained deeply unrefined. People used whatever was available: scraps of cloth, pages from newspapers, pages from books. The Sears catalogue, in 19th century America, became famous not only for its wide selection of goods, but for its pages, which hung in outhouses across the country. It wasn't until 1857 that wiping took its most familiar form. That year, a New York entrepreneur named Joseph Gaiety released a Gaiety's medicated paper, the world's first commercially packaged toilet paper. Infused with aloe and marketed as a medical product, each sheet bore his name. It was a novelty, expensive and slow to catch on. But the concept had been born. Soon, toilet paper would become a commodity. In 1890, the Scott Paper Company introduced the first rolls, no longer sheets in a box, but soft paper wrapped around a cardboard tube. And in the 20th century, innovation soared. Perforation, two-ply, softness, scented, quilted. With each improvement, wiping moved further away from its primal roots and deeper into the realm of comfort and consumption. The world had embraced paper, but something else had changed too. Wiping had become invisible. For most of human history, defecation was communal, a necessity shared with family, neighbors, even strangers. But the rise of indoor plumbing changed not only the mechanics of wiping, but its meaning. In the 19th century, Cities faced a sanitation crisis. Waste flowed through streets and seeped into drinking water. Epidemics spread. Cholera, typhoid, death. The answer came through pipes, porcelain, and public infrastructure. First in cities like London and Paris, and later across the Western world, indoor toilets became standard. The flush toilet, once a luxury, became a middle-class essential. With it came the modern bathroom, a room sealed by a door, a space of solitude. And in that silence, wiping became taboo. As Western society modernized, it also sanitized its language. Bodily functions were pushed out of polite conversation. Products for wiping were wrapped in euphemism: bathroom tissue, personal hygiene, comfort care. Children were taught not just how to wipe, but how not to talk about it. Advertising followed suit. Early 20th century ads for toilet paper featured mothers, babies, puppies, anything but the reality of defecation. Even today, commercials avoid words like feces or anus. The very act that unites all humans became something whispered, if acknowledged at all. And yet, behind every closed bathroom door, the same need persisted: to wipe, to clean, to be whole again. But not everyone embraced paper as the final answer. In much of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, water remained the preferred method. Bidets, buckets, dippers, and sprays replaced rolls of tissue. In Japan, toilet innovation reached futuristic heights: heated seats, built-in bidets, air dryers, deodorizers. Some toilets even play music to mask the sound of elimination. In these cultures, water wasn't a luxury. It was logical, cleaner, more complete. And while the West clung to paper, the rest of the world asked a simple question: why wipe when you can wash? Toilet paper, for all its softness and sophistication, carries a cost. Globally, over 27,000 trees are cut down each day to meet toilet paper demand. The manufacturing process consumes water, energy, and chemicals, bleaching agents, fragrances, adhesives. Most toilet paper is single-use, non-recyclable, and flushed away within seconds of contact. In a world facing climate crisis, that equation is hard to ignore. Some activists call for alternatives: bidets, reusable cloths, composting toilets. But for many, the idea of abandoning paper feels unthinkable, even unsettling. Wiping, it turns out, is not just physical. It's psychological, it's cultural, it's personal. To change how we wipe is to question the rituals we grew up with. And that kind of change doesn't happen easily. In the 21st century, we live in a paradox. We have the technology to put a man on Mars. We have toilets that can analyze our health through waste. We have billion-dollar companies selling lotions for post-wiping comfort. And yet, most people can't even say the word poop without blushing. Wiping is universal, but shame is learned. We are born without embarrassment. Every baby wipes, every toddler is taught. But somewhere along the way, silence falls. Parents lower their voices. Schools avoid the subject. And by adulthood, we've internalized the idea that cleanliness is private, that the body is impolite. And so we pretend. We hide the role. We muffle the sound. We emerge from bathrooms with a studied blankness. But behind the door, we are all the same. And when that illusion shatters, when disaster strikes, our relationship to wiping is laid bare. In 2020, during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, panic buying swept across the globe. Store shelves emptied. Videos showed shoppers brawling over toilet paper. In Australia, police were called to break up fights in grocery aisles. In America, rolls were locked behind glass. In the UK, rationing began. All for the same thing: the comfort of paper. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about control. In a world spiraling into chaos, toilet paper became a symbol of normalcy, of preparedness, of peace. We weren't just hoarding supplies, we were trying to protect dignity. Today we stand at a crossroads. Bidet sales are rising in the West. Sustainability is gaining ground. Conversations about hygiene, long silenced, are being reopened with honesty, humor, even activism. Influencers talk openly about wiping techniques. Doctors debunk myths on social media. Innovators design toilets that use no water, no paper, and no shame. Slowly, we are beginning to reclaim the body, not as something to be hidden, but something to be honored. And maybe in doing so we come full circle, not back to the wilderness, not back to the sponge, but back to a world where wiping is not taboo, but simply human. From the forests of prehistory to the porcelain of the modern age, the way we clean ourselves after defecation tells a story not only of hygiene, but of who we are, of our fears, of our values, of our desire to be clean, to be accepted, to be whole. Wiping is not a glamorous subject. It's not discussed in classrooms or celebrated in art. It exists in the shadows of daily life, hidden behind bathroom doors and cultural taboos. But behind its silence lies something profound. Because wiping is one of the few experiences that truly unites us all, across age, race, class, gender, geography, or belief. It's intimate, vulnerable, and deeply human. And to understand it is to understand ourselves. All over the world, wiping has long been more than hygiene. It has been ritual. In Islamic traditions, cleanliness is half of faith. The Prophet Muhammad emphasized the importance of washing with water after defecation. To this day, the practice of istinja, cleansing with water, is not just recommended, it's sacred. Every step, from entering the toilet with the left foot to exiting with the right, is guided by prayer and intention. In Hinduism, too, the body is a vessel of spiritual energy. Pollution, ashuddhi, is both physical and spiritual. Left-hand cleansing is customary, water is essential, and after relieving oneself, a full bath is often taken to restore ritual purity. In Japanese Shintoism, purity is everything. The boundary between the sacred and the profane is constantly managed. Bathing is a form of spiritual cleansing. And while toilet hygiene may be more private, it's still tied to the pursuit of inner and outer purity. Even among secular cultures, rituals persist. Some people fold their toilet paper a certain way, others flush before wiping, some inspect, some refuse to. There are personal methods, obsessive habits, superstitions, and all of it is invisible, performed silently, faithfully, day after day. These aren't quirks, they are rituals, and they reflect something deeper, the need to feel clean, the need to feel safe, the need to feel human. But if wiping connects us, it also isolates us, because somewhere along the way the act became laced with embarrassment, not because it's dirty, but because it's human. Western societies in particular inherited a legacy of bodily shame. From Victorian modesty to religious prudery, the body was something to be controlled, covered, managed. Elimination, so primal, so necessary, became a source of ridicule. Children were scolded for accidents, laughed at for smells, shamed into silence. That shame stays with us. Many adults today still hesitate to defecate in public restrooms. Some hold it in for hours. Some whisper about it, avoid eye contact, wait for others to leave. We've created an entire etiquette around pretending we don't poop. But pretending doesn't make us cleaner or better. It just makes us lonelier. Because the truth is, every person you know wipes. Every hero, every stranger, every lover, every leader. They all have this one thing in common, this small, strange, sacred routine, and when we reject it, we reject our own bodies. For many, wiping is not just a daily task, it's a daily struggle. People with disabilities, chronic illness, or age-related limitations often lose the ability to clean themselves independently. And with that loss comes a quiet grief, a sense of indignity, even humiliation. It's hard to describe the pain of needing help for something so private, of pressing a button and waiting for someone to come wipe you, of knowing your independence ends with the toilet. But it's here, in this quiet corner of human life, that compassion is tested and revealed. Caregivers who wipe the elderly, nurses who clean the sick, parents who wipe their children, they perform a sacred service, often without recognition, often without thanks. They restore dignity where it's most vulnerable. They remind us that wiping is not just about cleanliness, it's about care. Despite all this, despite the shame, the silence, the discomfort, humans do what we've always done. We laugh. Toilet humor spans continents and centuries. From ancient Roman graffiti to modern sitcoms, We joke about farts, poop, and wiping because it touches something so fundamentally real. We laugh not because it's disgusting, but because it's universal. Because in a world obsessed with image, wiping humbles us. No matter how powerful we are, no matter how wealthy, how revered, we all sit on the toilet. We all face the same vulnerability, and sometimes the only response is laughter. That laughter heals. It reminds us we're not alone. It brings this silent ritual back into the light, and in doing so, it dissolves shame. It's easy to think of wiping as trivial, as the footnote to human history. But look closer. Wiping reveals how we treat the body, how we care for the vulnerable, how we handle waste, physical, emotional, cultural. It tells us who we include and who we leave behind. It marks the boundary between the sacred and the profane, the civilized and the wild. And most of all, it speaks to the deepest human need of all: to feel clean, to feel accepted, to be seen, and still be loved. Tens of thousands of years ago, an early human crouched behind a tree. The wind was cold, the earth was soft, and after relieving themselves, they reached for a handful of moss, damp, pliable, green with life. They wiped, not because they read it in a book, not because someone told them to, but because their body asked for it. That moment, so ordinary, so forgotten, was part of something eternal. Because from the first moss to the last roll of quilted paper, from the snow-covered tundras of prehistory to the ceramic bathrooms of today, we've always tried to care for ourselves, to wipe away the dirt, to restore dignity, to face the mess, and move forward clean. This is what it means to be human, and so the next time you sit alone in silence behind a closed door, know this: you are not disgusting, you are not broken, you are not weird. You are part of a story older than words, a ritual shared by kings and cavemen, warriors and infants, prophets and presidents. You are wiping, and in that moment, you are exactly as human as you've ever been.